All right. Hello, hello.
Hi,
How's
how
it
are you?
going, Joe?
Yeah, I'm very well,
Good.
thank you.
Yeah, it's always nice to reconnect with you again. We've done a couple of these before. Just fun.
Yes, yeah, we have. Yeah, the last podcast went so well, we thought we'd do it again.
I mean, we should just start our own series at this point. Awesome. Well, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for hopping on. I really appreciate it. For everybody that's tuning in, I am Elizabeth. I'm the Chief Growth Officer over here at ViralMoment. So what ViralMoment does is that we pull a whole bunch, and I mean like millions, of videos for you across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, so you can better understand what are the conversations you want to know what's happening in. Joe here works for Signify, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about his job.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Sports Insights Director at Signify AI. We are a company who are kind of at the forefront of the online battle in terms of protecting athletes, high profile people, officials on social media from abuse and threat. So we work predominantly in sport, and we work with multiple teams, leagues, organizations across a whole breadth of sports, in kind of offering that always on protection. And then what I also work on the sports insight side is working with those clients and others to help them understand their audience, fan bases, fandom, to help them understand controlling narratives within fan bases through to brand affinities that can help commercial deals and kind of anything across that kind of social media insights and analytics. I've been working in this industry for quite some time now. 2012 was when I started.
Nice.
So the industry has changed immensely in that time. But before Signify, where I've been here since September 2024, I spent 6 years at Manchester United, where I looked after all of the social insight and analytics at the club and formed very much the basis of a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. Previous to that, I was at HSBC and worked and kind of helped to build their what became 24/7 social listening and analytics team. So yeah, an awful lot of experience of building teams and kind of understanding audiences and fan bases.
Yeah, and it's so cool. I mean, you work with some amazing, names, honestly, in the space, which probably can't name them all off, but I'm sure some of them are really fun. And it's so amazing, too. I think that so many people don't actually think about the type of stuff that players and athletes have to go through when it comes to like the kind of online conversations, good or ugly, that happen
Yeah,
around them.
particularly the kind of the abusive side of it, right? It can have a real
Yeah.
impact on performance, mental health. It can have a real impact on families as well, because it's not necessarily just the players who receive this abuse. So, being able to and because of the way that we bring all the data in and we analyze all of that data, we start to understand some of the behaviors as well. And you'd be surprised in certain sports. We also kind of work outside of just kind of elite professional sport in other areas as well. And you'd be amazed at the kinds of different tactics that people use or where that is ultimately originating from. And I don't necessarily mean where in the world that is originating from, but is it betting abuse as opposed to just fans being unhappy with performance? And so that's, I mean, it's interesting. It's also incredibly kind of difficult work, right? It's not easy to kind of look at, but the aim is that we kind of help be at the forefront of that, protect the athletes, protect the officials or managers, or even through to family members as well.
Yeah, that's so impressive. So I know today we wanted to actually go back in time, but not too far back in time, just earlier this year, so that we can chat about some of the things that we saw around athletes in the Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
a little bit
So
about how you thought about this project to get it started.
Yeah, so not anything to do with abuse on this one. This was purely out of my own interest that I wanted to do this. I think one of the one of the kind of things that we see after something like the Olympics or major sporting events is that kind of that high level analysis of people who suddenly saw large spikes in followers after the event or during the event. And so I kind of wanted to understand on a little bit of a deeper level as to why certain athletes generate huge spikes in followers, right? And so with something like the Olympics, it isn't just a case that people who win gold medals suddenly see massive spikes in followers, right? Because not everyone who won medals, and there was some athletes at the Winter Olympics who won multiple medals, gold medals, and didn't see the same kinds of spikes in followership. So I kind of was really interested in just trying to dig a little bit deeper and ultimately answer the question of why certain athletes connect with audiences, particularly on social and particularly through social video. And the Winter Olympics was just a really kind of interesting use case to kind of do that analysis.
Yeah, well, I'm excited, and I've seen that too. I mean, there's so many, big players in even not the Olympics, but just in other sports, soccer, football, other football. Like I don't know any of these other sports that people play, and there's so many like really good athletes out there that don't get the same kind of followership, even from their counterparts that maybe are just as good or on a different level than them too.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you can certainly apply this kind of thinking and this analysis across multiple different areas, not even just athletes. You could look at this across kind of brands or leagues or teams. But I think I always find the Olympics is really interesting because without wanting to kind of make this sound like I'm criticizing other athletes, Olympians always feel a lot more human because they're kind of they feel like just normal people, the way in which they have to kind of dedicate towards their training. They're also, got other parts of their life. They're not kind of people necessarily, if you think of high end football or soccer, as you will call it, players or those kind of real top end kind of sports stars in certain sports who, from a very young age, have been in this kind of world. I think we feel a bit more of a connection to Olympians. I think it's kind of part of the reason why the Olympic movement works so well, but it's also part of the reason why these people are just so unbelievable, right? Because it feels like it could be us, but it's definitely not us, right? No disrespect.
I did not do that kind of snowboard training.
Exactly, right? And I think the Winter Olympics is really interesting as well because it's sports that, you know, there's a kind of element of risk that they actually could really badly hurt themselves. So there is that kind of, it's no disrespect to the Summer Olympics, which is obviously incredible, but at the Winter Olympics, you're watching these people just like fly off kind of half pipes or do massive jumps and just kind of they do it as if it's just the most natural thing in the world. So I always find the Winter Olympics really fascinating because it's sports we don't typically engage with. No one really watches curling outside of the Winter Olympics, or
It's true.
kind of bobsleigh brings kind of people, and I think with social video as well, it's really interesting on sports like that because you just see the creativity, right? And you see bobsleigh, there was loads of people on baking trays or like oven trays, or kind of mimicking, or kind of the curling, and so that kind of side of it I think is really interesting as well, and that's kind of part of why I really wanted to dig into it and kind of try and understand it on a bit more deeper level.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to dig in. I watched most of the Olympics via TikTok, mostly because I was helping you pull a ton of data. And I was like, let's just go see like what we have for the Olympics. So I learned a ton about the Olympics from TikTok, not actually from watching the actual Olympics. So I'm intrigued.
And I think more and more now sport is kind of live sport is consumed through those kind of platforms as well, right?
It
And so
is,
it is,
yeah.
those clips can go everywhere really quickly, or they can bring conversations, but so much more. And we'll get into this when we start to go through it. It was so much more about also what happened away from the sporting arena that was really interesting. And so again, you know, the likes of TikTok, Instagram, they're hugely influential platforms for this. And so that's kind of the whole point of this, was really trying to understand what is it that really connects with audiences, particularly on social video. It isn't just going to be these people are unbelievable at the sport that they do, because that's the same for every single person that competed at the Olympics, right? So it's what kind of separated those, or what made certain athletes really stand out. So let me share my screen and we can dive
Yeah.
into
Without further ado,
it.
let's take a
Yeah,
look. I'm so excited. It's one of
great.
my favorite things is to see like what people are able to like accomplish with viral moment data. And I was just talking about this online too, is like what you're going to show here is really exciting because it's the story of the data. You could just look at a bunch of videos and see like videos of stuff and be like, oh cool, they got followers, or hey, that video got 10 million likes or whatever. but why?
Yeah,
What's the point? Like, who cares? Like, what's the so what of that? And so the work you do is amazing because you dive into that so what.
yeah, exactly that. And the thing for me with all of the analysis that I do on the sports insight side of things, it's telling the story that the data is telling us rather than just kind of, I'm not a big believer in just kind of giving big numbers or kind of facts or a dashboard kind of approach. I think in my experience from working kind of with the brands that I have, it's being able to kind of make a story make sense to people, both within the business and potentially outside of it, that really helps this kind of data cut through. And we know social data can be incredibly powerful and incredibly impactful on decisions across comms, marketing, commercial content. So, but it's being able to kind of really tell the story. So that's kind of what you'll see through this is it's very much kind of the story of the Olympics and the story of these athletes is really what kind of comes through here. I didn't and really that kind of gets to the initial approach that I took. So we I looked at basically 8 different athletes to start with, and on a very kind of simple basis, I looked at who generated the most video views and who was generating the most posts around them on social video. So this was data that I was looking at that was talking around the Olympic Games. So I wasn't looking at posts that were just mentioning Chloe Kim, for example. It had to be mentioned in the context of the Winter Olympics or the context of the sports and disciplines that they were competing in. So
Okay.
this obviously has an Olympic lens on it, but that's kind of the whole point of this anyway. So I don't think that's necessarily too bad. But so when I was looking at who generated the most views and the most posts, a couple of things stood out to me really quickly, and I'm sure most people would have realized this looking at this as well. 7 of the 8 are female athletes, which I think is really interesting. And there's only 2 of them that are not Gen Z athletes. So straight away, I'm
Oh.
starting to kind of think to myself, okay, is this going to be something around the emergence of Gen Z athletes on the Olympic stage? And is that something ultimately that I'm going to be able to kind of uncover here? So if I'd have just taken the kind of approach of purely looking at which athletes had the most views, I would kind of come to a different conclusion than the one that ultimately I did. So this is just a very kind of quick look at all the different athletes and when there were certain spikes in terms of the most views. So for most of the athletes, the biggest spike comes in their defining moment in the games, good or bad. So Lindsey Vonn has that horrific incident when she's competing on her kind of run. That is the biggest moment where we saw views around Lindsey Vonn. And actually, in terms of spikes, she was the second biggest spike out of anyone that I looked at during the
Oh,
game.
that was a
So,
crazy incident.
yeah, I mean, it's there's this thing with live sport when things like that happen, there's that fine line between showing you and kind of doing a bit too much sometimes. And I think, anyone who watched that live, the you could hear the cries from her as they were kind of treating her, which was pretty horrific. And there was a whole debate around whether or not she even should have been competing at these games because of what had happened to her in the build
Yeah.
up. So and if we look at someone like Jutta Leerdam, the Dutch speed skater, she wins gold. That's the biggest kind of spike for her. We've got the men's free skate event, which is where Ilya Malinin kind of his defining moment. And what you'll see very quickly is Alyssa Liu is the standout star of these games. I think anyone who's been on the internet kind of since the Winter Olympics is fully aware of Alyssa Liu is the standout star of these Winter Olympics, right? She's been everywhere. I saw just this week her dance is now on Fortnite, which is usually a great indication of someone
All
who has
right.
cultural relevance.
Yeah, she's really
So
tapped in.
yeah, and I think the thing with Alyssa in particular was it wasn't actually her gold medal skate that was the biggest spike for her. It was the gala event, which is the traditional kind of final performance for the skating program. And it was that kind of moment that really kind of catapulted her straight into the center of kind of the social media video landscape. So if we just looked at views, ultimately, that's not going to help me answer this question of kind of which athlete had the biggest cut through and why did they have the biggest cut through. So what we did, we took all of the data and all of the metrics that we got through ViralMoment, and we basically created our own metric score called salience score. I've gone backwards and forwards on exactly whether what we should call this, but I think salience is the right word because it's ultimately who had that real deep kind of connection with the audience. And so that's the name that we did for this score. But essentially, we looked at all of the kind of metrics from views, posts, shares, comments, and likes, and really kind of what we then did is we basically weighted on what we believe to be the most important indication of kind of salience and connection, and we generated our salience score. So what that then did was it completely reframes kind of our list. If we'd have done it on views, someone like Alyssa Liu would obviously have come out on top, but then Lindsey Vonn would have been higher up. Jutta Leerdam would have been in the top three as well. And so this completely reframes the kind of the whole kind of conversation that I'm starting to kind of investigate. And so with the way that the salient score works, whoever comes out on top will always score 100, and then it will basically be a kind of descending score from there based within the context of the athletes that we looked at in this use case, but it could be brands, teams, leagues, it could be a whole host of different things that we ultimately apply this kind of methodology to. And so I think what's really interesting is your figure skaters were standout kind of stars from these games, right? Amber Glenn second, Ilya Malinin, as the kind of clear top three who really had a kind of real strong connection and cut through. And then we see Eileen Gu, it kind of comes in fourth. And basically what I've done is I've focused on those four in particular because I really wanted to kind of try to understand, is there any kind of connective tissue here between those four? And what can we kind of take from that? So I think the thing that's really interesting, particularly with the four athletes that I'm gonna kind of look through in more detail, is they all speak about mental health and they all speak around the stress of elite competition and how they kind of deal with that and what their process is. And so that's really interesting in itself in those two particular kind of things to hear athletes talk about that. So what I've done is I've then dug into basically the data in more detail with all four of these athletes. And so if we start with Alyssa Liu, what's really interesting, clearly her skating performance was, amazing, particularly her performance that wins gold. But what really captured the attention of social media users was that gala performance. And so what was really interesting with that, you've got the music and the choreography, and she really kind of tapped into the zeitgeist with her musical choices. Skating kind of has a bit more of a kind of feeling that it's usually more traditional kind of music. You don't tend to hear too much in the way of like modern music when these kind of skating events are happening. We're seeing that change over the last few years. I mean, the Spice Girls were one of the musical choices at this particular Winter Olympics. But Alyssa Liu chose Pink Pantheress, and you've got the Zara Larsson edit on Stateside that she skates to in her gala performance. And that was something that immediately cut through. It didn't take long before her kind of opening was then trending on TikTok as people were copying the way that she'd started that performance. That's then the piece that has now gone into Fortnite that I mentioned earlier. So really kind of connecting with the pop culture. So her music and her choreography were really modern, and that style really kind of, we saw loads of people talking about the fact that she's got effortless cool, right? And so I think as well what was really interesting, her humility kind of shone through as well. And that first video on the left is kind of her congratulating another skater when they found out that they've won the bronze medal. She's taken the gold, but she's taken the moment to kind of celebrate and enjoy that moment with her kind of competitor as well. And people really kind of connect with that kind of humility and that kind of authenticity. And also her story is really inspiring as well, right? She retired from the sport at the age of 16. She comes back at the age of 20, goes on to win a gold medal, first American female figure skating gold medal, I think, since 2002. So, she had this huge kind of relevant moment for American skating in herself. but quite clearly it was her humility, tapping into that zeitgeist, the fact that she was really cool with her kind of skating. I mean, when she finished her gold medal performance and she swears when she comes off the ice, right? This is that kind of that note
She's
that,
very relatable.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly that. And I think it is, and the second video is that kind of thing of people are almost kind of saying, she's the one, she's our queen, she's our Gen Z queen, and she's going to kind of lead us, right? Because she is so relatable. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, if you look at the figures down below of her total kind of
Yeah.
number of videos and views, it's huge. It's
I
by
mean,
far and
that's
away.
11,000 people posting about her. Like
Yeah,
that's not her owned stuff. That's all earned media right there around
yeah,
just her at the Olympics. Like
exactly.
specifically, that's a very small segment of the whole Alyssa Liu conversation during that time, but like that's a significant number of people talking about her.
Exactly. And it's not only is it 433,000 comments, so people are talking, it's 4.3 million shares. So that's people who are seeing these videos and sharing them with people. That kind of connection is really, really powerful. And it's all just organic, right? It's come from these kind of clips that we can see on the left and so many more. And so that authenticity, that being relatable, I think is something that we start to see as kind of connective tissue as we go through this. And so Amber Glen's really, really interesting because if we'd have just done this ranked on video views or likes or comments, she would have come down a lot lower. She may even not have been someone that I ended up kind of looking into in more detail. But because of the way that we kind of had done this salience score, she now actually comes second. And I think it's really interesting her kind of journey in the Winter Olympics because at the beginning she's very open in the press conferences before the skating event starts. She talks about her sexuality, she talks about her political views, and that generates an awful lot of attention from America's political right online, particularly on YouTube. She's getting an awful lot of kind of attention because she speaks so openly about the struggles that she's had as someone who is in the LGBTQ plus community. And so early on in the skating performance, she falls over. She has a really kind of disappointing performance based on kind of where she was hoping to. There's videos of her crying as she comes off the ice. And that was almost seen as this kind of gotcha moment for the America's kind of political right, who were really kind of talking about her, almost as this kind of that's what you get for speaking out against Trump. And so she had loads of attention and heat early on. But what was really interesting was after that moment, or really kind of before, but certainly after that moment, you start to see this just wave of support that comes through and kind of people really start to kind of rally behind her. And so, because of that representation, because of her openness to talk about her sexuality, we saw loads of people kind of really kind of, rallying behind her, referring to her as a queen, as a baddie, and kind of really kind of people almost saying that they feel seen because of the way that she was speaking about these things. Um, and that's something that's really important. But again, it's friendship, it's support, it's that humility side of things. There was great videos and so many videos of her really like fangirling, particularly over Alyssa Liu. And there's the three American female skaters who are kind of known as the Blade Angels, who um, who all kind of are really close knit, and you can tell they have a lot of friendship and support. So not only that, but there was a kind of loads of videos of she steps into to comfort Kaori Sakamoto, who had kind of been really upset with her skate, and at the end of her skate, there was loads of cameras around her. Amber Glenn comes in, she moves all the cameras away, and she kind of gives support to Kaori in that moment. And this is something that people just instantly kind of connected with in terms of that, almost like she was a bigger sister, right? And she was
Yeah.
looking out for people. And she wears a heart on her sleeve. There's no two ways about it. You can tell if she's happy with her performance, if she's sad, those kind of raw emotions, both in the press conferences, but also on the ice, again, is just something that people really kind of connect with.
Well, when they make clips of that too, and all of that stuff ends up on TikTok and online, everyone's like authenticity, authenticity. And I hear you, the word is getting a little burned out, but it's still true. I mean, when people are very authentic and very much themselves, whether they're on the stage or they're just, vlogging themselves for the day, whatever it is, the authenticity behind that is going to it's going to increase those view counts. It's going to make people more intrigued by what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting with this stuff is authenticity can be messy as well, right? It doesn't have to be. It's not polished, and so showing your emotions and not being afraid to kind of say what you feel, those kind of things, that really connects because again, it makes people relatable. And again, you have this kind of, as I mentioned earlier, that the Olympians feel more like us. And so when you see these people who are doing these unbelievable things in the sporting arena, but then they're talking like us as well, it really kind of inspires people. And, you know, she had nowhere near the level of volume of views or anything like that. But within the kind of metric that we created and the way that these different metrics all interact and the way that we kind of weight them, it actually shows that she was right up there with Alyssa Liu in terms of that salience and in terms of that connection. And I think it's really interesting just because of that journey that she goes on, right? From kind of where she was at the beginning to where she was at the end. That is really interesting. There's two different audiences that were talking about her, but it's almost like she had this just huge wave of support from kind of the second group of people that came through that really kind of lifted her up. And it's interesting. I've heard Amber Glenn speak since the Winter Olympics about kind of the negativity of social media and the attention that she got and how she really struggled with that. But some of this stuff that is a bit more underlying that is not easy to see, particularly if you're in your own comment section. This is the stuff that I think is really interesting because actually Amber Glenn is being lifted up as this real like beacon and someone that people can really kind of rally behind. And I think that's really interesting as well.
You see a ton of positive comments coming through. Even there was so much support around her, regardless of some of the backlash that she got from, very political people on a different side. If you just squashed, the rest of the community just stepped up and squashed that down.
Yeah, and it was really evident in the kind of videos and the nature of the way in which those videos kind of changed because we saw a lot, particularly more YouTube than anything, where there was a lot more discussions around what she had been saying in press conferences. Where then you get TikTok and you get all the edits and you get, she's being referred to as like a woke baddie and things like that in a good context, right? And it's people kind of saying, this is not somebody that we should be looking at as being like, we shouldn't be like this person. Actually, this is someone that we definitely should be more like. And so, that's the kind of thing I think that was really interesting to watch as the games unfold.
Yeah, and from an engagement standpoint, as I move to the next slide here too, we had 633,000 comments for Alyssa Liu. There's 153,000 here. I mean, that's a big disparity, but Amber Glenn's coming in second here. And so I think that talks a lot to your salience score of she actually sustained the conversation longer and held more regardless of what all these little engagement metrics say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's ultimately looking at any one of these engagement metrics in isolation doesn't tell the whole story, right? And I think anyone who does social media analysis and insight kind of understands that. But I think sometimes I've seen it in kind of, various other roles or conversations that I've had. People can fixate sometimes on views and likes. And you'd be amazed how many still kind of really drive those two as KPIs of performance. But this stuff is so much more powerful, right? In terms of being able to show that real salience and that real connection is a far more meaningful kind of way to kind of look at essentially anything that you want to kind of do this kind of benchmarking exercise on. And so if we move on to Ilya Malinin, I mean, he can do that backflip that is just insane, right? That's always
so insane.
It's going to generate views. It's always going to generate millions of views because he can do that so effortlessly. But I think with him in particular, what really stood out was how he spoke about his mental health struggles after his free skate final where he falls. It was shocking because everyone assumed he was just going to come in and win gold. He was kind of the superstar. And kind of his performance from earlier on, I think it was a couple of years ago now, but his performance that kind of went viral and everyone saw this incredibly kind of athletic skater doing all of these flips. And so when he falls, it was a huge shocking moment for kind of the sport and one of the defining moments of the games. But when he comes out afterwards and he spoke, he said that just before he went on the ice, every negative thought that he'd ever had was like rushing through his head. And instantly you saw people kind of being like, I've been there. I completely understand that, right? And it is that again, we're going to we have to find a new word instead of authenticity. We
I
are
know, we really do.
now, but
Yeah.
that's truly what we talk about when we talk about being authentic. Because from a media training perspective, absolutely no one would be encouraging athletes to be talking about stuff like that, right? Because it was quite shocking in terms of just hearing him talk around this. But we saw this kind of reaction to it where you had therapists kind of talking about, the pressures on Olympians and how people deal with it and relating it through to kind of more into to kind of us mere mortals that don't do this stuff. But you just saw so many people relate to that feeling of, I guess, almost like helplessness. Uh, and can even happen to some of the greatest and most talented people on the world, kind of on the world stage, as well as kind of all of us and in when we're just trying to order a coffee and we don't even want to say the thing properly, right? So all that that I'm not speaking from personal experience there.
No, no, not at all.
So that's kind of, it's really, really interesting. And I think his personal journey, again, it kind of connects with Alyssa Liu in that kind of that journey and kind of coming through the struggles and the adversity and kind of being able, the embodiment of perseverance and kind of showing that passion. And the backflips obviously help as well, right? Because
Yeah, I mean, who can't do a backflip on ice?
yeah, oh yeah, exactly. Easy. I mean, the fact that he's doing it in like jeans and a hoodie in that video is just even more insulting to everybody else because it's just like, it's kind of so easy for him. But
Yeah.
that obviously, it's kind of, it would be quite easy just to say, oh, he can do backflips. That's why everyone kind of connects to him. But if we strip the backflips out, he would still be high in this, right? Because it's not necessarily that in the Winter Olympics context that really connected with people.
And so, remind me, did he win gold?
No, so because he fell in his final, in his kind of men's free skate final, he fell twice, I think it was, and so he didn't even medal, and so
Oh,
that
okay.
in itself was really shocking. And it was
Yeah.
then when he came out afterwards and said about, you know, you listen to the commentary and people were kind of early on talking that he doesn't look right, like he doesn't look himself, and so people were able to pick up on it. And so he could have come out and just dismissed it and just said, this is what happens. It was one of those days, bad day at the office, all the cliches that we quite often hear, but he didn't. He addressed exactly why he struggled. And I think that was the thing that really connected with people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still seeing content. It's a couple months later now, and he's still popular, which, I mean, per kind of the whole topic of our conversation, too, it's like gold doesn't necessarily mean that you've won.
No,
Like,
absolutely not. No, and
yeah.
he won medal as part of the team event, but obviously the kind of the solo event was the big one and the one that everyone was looking to when it comes to the figure skating. So yeah, the fact that he doesn't medal kind of helps prove the point of this as well, right? In terms of it isn't just gold medals that dictate who sees the biggest spikes in followers, and so it's he is someone who you might not have known his name, but you probably knew what he looked like. And so when you saw him, you were probably like, "Oh, that's the guy that I've seen me doing all the backflips, right?" So
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of he had a connective kind of thread there on social and on video, particularly in kind of the lead up. But it was really this games, and again because of what he said off of the ice, less so what he did on of it. And I think that's really interesting. And I think arguably the most fascinating athlete to look at of everyone that I did was Eileen Gu.
My favorite.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, she is a stone cold icon without any shadow of a doubt, right? So, what was really interesting with Eileen Gu is there were far more videos of her press conferences than there actually was of her performance on the slopes. And I mean, she was unreal in both, so it kind of makes sense. But she does give probably two of the greatest answers in any press conference ever. at the Winter Olympics, which is part of the reason why so many people kind of really connected to her. She got asked this quite insulting question of was she kind of like felt like she'd lost out on gold when she won silver, and she just kind of instantly kind of clapped back with I'm the most decorated female free skater in history. You know, it almost is a kind of what a ridiculous thing to ask. But what's amazing is just the way that she kind of answers these questions. And there's another question that gets asked um, where it's actually a great question and it produces an amazing answer where the journalist asks her, I think it was Charlotte Harper, who's a UK journalist, um, asks her, does she ever think before she speaks? And a lot of people quite laugh when she says it. And she says, I don't mean that kind of in a nasty way, but you give these incredible answers and seemingly they just come immediately. Like, do you ever actually think before you kind of give your answers? She
Yeah.
feels off this absolutely phenomenal answer. I'm sure most people have seen it by now, but her her kind of process of thinking about thinking is really incredible. And this was another one of those videos that kind of therapists and kind of academics were talking about around her self-awareness, her mental control. It was just like it's incredible. It's textbook. It's probably more than textbook. It's almost like otherworldly in the way that she was answering some of these questions. And so that really kind of connected, you know, that kind of her talking in her press conferences really kind of people gravitated to that and they were really really fascinated by the things that she said and just the way that she kind of handles herself and carries herself and that resilience both in how she answers those questions. You know, there's a whole debate around the fact that she chose, you know, her cultural identity, the fact that she chose to represent China. She could have represented America. There's a lot of connections there with Alyssa Liu, who was the other way around and chose to represent America, could have represented China. And so obviously I've looked at all of this data in the Winter Olympics context. So there is loads of that debate that potentially doesn't come into this as much, particularly around Eileen Gu, because again, there was a whole load of attention around the fact that she chose to kind of she's chosen to represent China in the sporting kind of context. So but that her whole cultural identity I think is really, really interesting. And I think you could probably make a bit of an argument that she's very aware. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to kind of handle herself and present herself. And so when we talk about authenticity and relatability, you could push back on that a little bit if you wanted to be like, well, she knows full well kind of how to kind of play the game if you like. But I don't really think you can fake the answers that she gives in press conferences. So that's the thing that really kind of stands out when we talk around kind of the way that she inspires and the authenticity and all of that stuff. You can't really fake some of that stuff, and her answers in particular on those press conferences are amazing. But
Yeah.
just to go back to that image on the left hand side of her before she does her runs, she she visualizes what she's doing, and loads of athletes do that. But that particular thumbnail and that particular kind of clip of her visualizing what she's doing before she goes and does it was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It was probably the most used thumbnail of any athlete in the games, right? And that's because people, you know, they were talking about how thoughtful and great she is at these press conferences, and then she goes out and competes, and she is a stone cold killer, right? She is. People were talking about she's tough, she's cold, the aura that she's got when she's getting ready to compete, and so that really connected with people as well because let's not kind of lie about this. It's the sport stuff that people really love as well. And so when they see that kind of someone really locking in, it really kind of connects and people really, really love that stuff.
Yeah, well, she's balancing both sides so beautifully. You know, she's authentically coming across in these press conferences, and she's like, "Oh, like I'm Aline," and yes, and conference that you mentioned where the reporter asked her, "You know, how, do you even think before you speak?" That I've actually recently watched that again. It came across my feed. But she talks about how she journals and she thinks through her process, and I think what people liked about that is yeah, it's authentic and telling you what you're doing, but it's also people like, oh hey, I have the same struggles that Ilya Malanen. Oh, I'm gonna mess
Yeah.
that up. about he has, for example, maybe I can apply some of the things that Eileen does that she's talking about to help me overcome these types of things. And so I saw some of those conversations do kind of circle around where what she was saying was almost like as a thought leader for her space, for this generation that's watching her here. And then at the same time, she's an athlete, and athletes are intense, competitive, and like you have to be cutthroat to get to the level that she's at. And so this locking in phase was very much like, she's one person, but she's got two sides of her, and she's happy to show them both, right on their face. And she's like, I'm going to be really nice to you behind the stage, but I'm also going to I'm going to do my run for me, and I'm going to do the best that I can, and I'm going to zone. And she does it.
Oh God, yeah, she does, and she does it over and over again at multiple different kind of events as well. I think, which is it's kind of really, really impressive. And I think if we kind of look, so this was very much the Olympics that saw the emergence of Gen Z athletes, right? There are Gen Z athletes in every sport, so this isn't something that is like this was the defining moment of Gen Z or the emergence. But this particular games, it's Gen Z athletes that really connected with social audiences, particularly social video audiences. And ultimately, that's kind of, when I start to kind of look at actually what all of this means, we know that it's personalities of athletes and sports stars that bring viewers to sports now more than ever, right? We see this. We see kind of younger generations grow up rooting for athletes and players more than they do for teams, and they'll follow those players when they move around. We kind of saw that phenomenon really with like LeBron James, really, in terms of people were becoming a LeBron James fan or a Messi or a Ronaldo rather than necessarily the teams that they play for. And so, I saw it when I was at United. Ronaldo comes back to the club, 5.5 million people come with him, and suddenly the following increases. And when he leaves, 5.5 million people disappear and go with him somewhere else. And so that kind of thing is really interesting. It's the personalities that really kind of bring people into these sports, particularly sports that are not in the mainstream, right? So that's why the Winter Olympics or the Olympic movement in general is so important, because it opens people up to sports that they would probably just never really connect with. And I think Gen Z athletes in particular, they're not afraid to speak openly and honestly about mental health, their process, their sexuality, their political views. I mentioned this before with media training, but in past generations, 3 of those would have been just absolutely hammered out of people. So under no circumstances do you talk about those things, particularly not mental health, right? That's always been a big, big no-no, as has sexuality. But this generation have got sporting superstars who are just not scared to speak up and stand up. And I think we see it with the Gen Z generation in general anyway. They're not afraid to speak up and stand up themselves. So to have the sporting superstars doing the same thing, it really is that kind of validation in terms of that kind of thought process, right? And I think we shouldn't be mistaken that because they are so open about talking through all these things, particularly things like mental health, doesn't mean that they are any more or any less competitive, driven, cold-blooded when it comes to actually competing. Like Eileen Gu is as competitive and cold-blooded as someone like Kobe Bryant, right? But it just, the way in which these Gen Z athletes are speaking, it connects them to their audience. It allows their audience to feel seen and heard in a way that we probably don't really see. We haven't seen this before in this kind of way. And I think that's the thing that's really fascinating. That's the reason why these particular athletes saw the biggest spikes in followers. And I also think this is something that we can kind of take and look across. We don't have to just take this in a sports context. We can look across anything. These are the things that audiences and people today want to speak about, and they want to see that messy authenticity. They want to see people talking through their process, right? So they can enjoy the greatness of the sport, but they can also relate to the people as well. And I think that's the key bit, is being able to really feel like actually they feel like one of us. Like we could go for a drink or we go out for a coffee, and it feels like actually we would have a connection and be able to kind of be on the same level. I think it's really interesting, but I also think it's incredibly powerful as well.
Yeah, and I mean, their generation grew up with, I don't know, Instagram as like their main point of contact for a very long time, and it's just evolved ever since then. So I think they're so much more comfortable talking about this stuff because they're so used to seeing it. I'm a millennial. I'm going to age myself here, but like I didn't grow up. I grew up in the era of the Kobe Bryants and the Michael Jordans, where they're like, I sit at a press conference after and before my game. I get asked a bunch of questions by the reporters from the sports news networks, and I answer them in a very specific PR friendly way, and I leave. And that's, they have all this training and they do these things and they move on. And that was very much the culture around that. And now these people are like, I've been vlogging about my life since I was like 5, like
Yeah.
whatever, screw you guys, I'm gonna talk about what I want to talk about. And that's just a whole different thing that these people have access to that historically hasn't really been there. Like we haven't had short form video, we haven't had social media in growing up in these people's lives for a long time until really this Gen Z generation started. And I think that's what makes them easier to connect to, is they're like, well, of course I can do this. Like I've been doing it literally forever.
Yeah,
Like,
and
okay.
I also I think because the younger generations, and I'm a millennial as well, so I completely understand what you've just said. But I think with the younger generation, because they've grown up in this social media age, they can see through fakeness really, really quickly, like
Yeah.
incredibly quickly, right? The younger generation don't fall for the kind of scams that sadly some of the older generation do, right? Because they can see through this stuff. They can see through the BS really, really quickly. And so if athletes try to put some of that kind of gloss on, people just see through it so quickly. And so they really want people to be open and honest and messy and all that stuff, because it connects and it kind of connects to people in a much, much deeper way. And so I think it's quite hard to be authentic, to be honest. I think, it is a word that we've been using in social analysis for years and years now, talking about it. I remember we spoke about it loads at United in terms of really trying to bring some of that through. I actually think it's quite hard to really, really be yourself. I think is incredibly hard, particularly on social media. And so these athletes just rocking up in press conferences and answering questions like this is, you know, as someone who is a millennial, I look at it and just be like, this is unbelievable in terms. I just
You're
think
putting your,
there's a level
yeah,
of bravery there, right? That I think is really, really impressive. You're just putting yourself out there. I think it's
it's so much vulnerability, and like they open them up to so much, backlash, for
Mhm.
example, like we saw with our Queen Batty ice skater. And you have to know that that's what you're opening yourself up to, and just be like, whatever, like screw these people, I don't care. But that can be really hard,
Mm.
and then and even if you outwardly you're like, whatever, I don't care about these people, I'm gonna say what I say, that's great. But it does still kind of like, it gets to you over time, and it erodes, and the work you do is beautiful to kind of help them get through that,
Yeah,
and
and that's
just
that's kind
focus
of
on what they're doing. Yeah.
that's kind of where it links in terms of the two sides that we do, right? That we can do this analysis and we can encourage that this is the kind of stuff that people want, but then we can also be there as that layer of protection to kind of help for the other side of the conversation, where people are not ready for people like this to kind of be so open, and they feel compelled to say all the horrible stuff that they do. So being able to kind of offer that protection alongside also kind of the reassurance of this is how to approach things, or this is kind of what we're seeing in the data. I think those two, they actually kind of work and fit together kind of quite well in that context.
Yeah. Well, Joe, this was fascinating and amazing. I mean, honestly, just looking at the numbers that came across, I wouldn't have come to the same conclusion as you did, but implementing that score, I mean, it says a lot. And it's so true, because even a few months later, like we're still seeing that those 4 people
Hmm.
have this continuing conversation. And, Lindsey Vonn wasn't even at the top, but she did have those initial main spikes in her conversation. And she's, fabulous and a wonderful skater. And she, had an unfortunate circumstance, but it's really interesting to watch how these conversations are going to play out over time. And I bet that these 4 athletes, come the next Winter Olympics, are going to have such a bigger following, given that they're part of the Olympics next time as well, and they want to
Yeah,
go and do
yeah, and
that.
Alyssa Liu in particular is just, she's become this huge kind of real kind of superstar, and she's been everywhere. She's kind of everywhere. People are
Yeah.
walking down the street in New York and she's filming something, and that's the kind of thing of that. She's just become this kind of huge, but she still has remained, even after the Winter Olympics and the craziness that came with that. She still has remained incredibly honest. She was asked at the Met Gala, if it wasn't for skating, what would she be famous for? And she just looked at the person asking the question and went, nothing. And just nothing. I wouldn't be famous for anything else, and just kind of walked off, and you just think, fair enough. Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we see a lot of this in other sports as well, right? We see a lot of this in terms of, you look at the revolution of something like Formula One, it's personalities that have really driven that, and the whole drive to success has all been about bringing the personalities out. And we see it more and more that there is a reluctance in sport, I think, to really do this, not just from necessarily, I think the athletes themselves are probably far more open to it, but certainly behind the scenes, traditional comms, or, there is that kind of, there's still that kind of concern of, well, we can't put them out there too much because it will attract negativity, right? But we definitely seeing more and more there is this shift towards this type of stuff. And these young athletes coming through are just showing how to do it, and just fearless in the way that they do it.
Yeah, they're truly paving the way. Well, Joe, this is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this.
If people want to reach out and kind of, have any conversations on that or anything that we do, always kind of welcome to having a chat with people. So do feel free to reach out, and kind of any feedback is always appreciative.
Well, once again, Joe, fabulous to chat with you. This is amazing. I love the work that you do for all of the things that Signify AI does, but especially when you use ViralMoment data.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right, well, we'll chat soon. You have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, and you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.